We wanted to talk a little bit about Bible prophecy today, and especially in relation to all of the talk about building a third temple in Jerusalem, and whether that temple is needed for end-time events to take place. We want to talk a little bit about who's known as the anti-Messiah or the Antichrist. But before we do that, as we all know, for the past month and a half, there's been a lot of trouble in Israel between the Palestinians and the Jews there. So the radical faction of the Palestinian people, which is pretty much governing the Gaza Strip, Hamas, has been firing rockets into Tel Aviv over the last couple of weeks now. And we just wanted to go backtrack a little bit and see how this latest conflict began. And Peter, could you tell us, how did this all begin on April the 13th? And that's, according to the reports we've read, is when it did begin.
Yeah, it's hard to say when these things begin, because of course this is part of something much, much bigger. It's not as if these sides just started striking each other over the events that happened in April. But of course some things did happen, and it was a series of events. Israel's putting different restrictions on Muslim worship at their holy place, at their mosques. Continued eviction of Palestinian families from Jerusalem, which is something that's been going on for a very long time.
I think this specific incident on the 13th of April, which was one of the holy days of Ramadan, Eid, where that night of very sacred Muslim prayers, there was also going to be a speech nearby given by the president of Israel, not the prime minister, and it was in commemoration of Israel's Memorial Day. So because he was giving the speech nearby, Israeli police apparently went in and disconnected the speakers, which are located in the minarets, those old towers surrounding the mosque, and they just cut the cables, which aggravated the people that were worshiping there. So that little incident.
But it's not as if rockets started firing over that.
No, the rockets didn't come till almost a month later, actually, when this whole situation with the 6 Palestinian families who are, maybe evicted from their homes in which they have lived since 1948 in those very same houses. David, do you have any other information that you can give us? How come it's escalated to it's been 7 years since there's been any military action between Hamas and the Israeli government. Why is it escalated to this point right now?
Well, I think there's always been a problem with Jerusalem. They're fighting over Jerusalem. The Jews would like to rebuild their temple, actually, and they have all the materials to do it. It's just that they don't have the place to do it. They believe that where Abraham offered up Isaac, that rock should be where the temple should go. The problem with that is the Mosque of Omar is there covering that rock. Now there is debate about the temple and where it should be, and there's contradictions of opinions about where it was during the time of the Roman occupation.
Now, before you go into the temple, why is it so important, do you think, that these people are talking about building a third temple? I know out there in the Christian world, and in relation to some of the passages in the book of Daniel, which are prophetic, it talks about the Antichrist standing up in the holy place, the abomination of desolation in the holy place, and the term holy place is being translated by many people as being the temple, which does not exist. So,
or a part of the temple, right? A specific part of the temple was the holy place.
That's right.
Where the presence was supposed to be.
That's right, the innermost part of the temple, where they had the veil and all that. Is that just because of that passage in Daniel? Maybe we could put the verse up here on the screen. Is because of that passage, does there have to be a third temple for end time events to take place?
Well, actually, the Jews want to put the temple up because they believe the Messiah will not come until that time. It says, when the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. So they're waiting for that opportune time to rebuild the temple, to start the sacrifice again, so the Messiah will come. Now, for the Christian people,
you're referring to a passage in the book of Psalms, right?
that's right.
What's the reference?
Psalm 102:16.
Right, which says?
It says, when the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory.
Okay, now that was written 1,000 years before Jesus. Why do not the Jews feel that Jesus Christ was the fulfillment of that verse? Why?
That's a very good question.
A lot of reasons. That's a big topic there.
Yes. So perhaps Jesus was the fulfillment of that verse. At least we believe he was as Christians.
Yeah, most definitely, yes.
Yes. So
yeah, he fulfilled so many prophecies, place of his birth, the date of his death, that he would be born of a virgin. His
all
hands
right
and
there.
feet would be pierced.
Right.
They didn't do that
We did
before
a
the
great
Roman.
segment on this.
Yes.
Actually.
yes.
There
Now,
are so many prophecies
the
about
question
it.
is to me, why so many Christians favor the building of a third temple? Because there seems to be, at least in this country, a pact between fundamental Christians and people of the Jewish faith.
Right.
And I realize
Israel in particular.
Israel in particular, yes, exactly. And I can see the common denominator, which would be the Bible, except for that would be only the Old Testament part of the Bible. So why is there such support of the building of a temple in the Christian world here?
Right. Well, according to the Daniel prophecies, Daniel was very much into the end time period, especially Daniel chapter 11. And it says that there will be a man that arises, and he will be a dictator. He'll be the final world leader. And
could we just stop for a second? Let's put a verse up on the screen here, a verse that is talking about what David just mentioned. This verse.
Okay. And so what happens is he comes in and he sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
Now that's Paul. That's from
yes,
a prophecy
that's
that Paul gave.
2 Thessalonians, that's right.
Okay, let's stop for just a minute and put this scripture up there so you can see that also.
Right. And then it says that he places the abomination of desolation in the temple. Now, there are different thoughts about that, whether the people, the Christian people, are the temple of God. And of course, we are the temple of God, but there has to be more of a physical place.
So do we think that, in other words, if there is going to be an Antichrist, someone that rules the world and brings the whole world together, will he be seated in Jerusalem? Peter, do you think that's the place the Antichrist will actually sit?
Could be. There are passages that do talk about Jerusalem. There are passages that talk about the temple and the holy place. I think what's really important to recognize in all this is for one, the location of these events does not mean, should not translate into Christian support for things that Israel does. There does not need to be a connection between the wars that Israel has with its neighbors and how we feel about Bible prophecy. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Christians are very supportive of any kind of violence that Israel commits because they see a need for this state of Israel to bring back Jesus. And I think that is misguided, misled, and it leads Christians to support things and engage in things that do not become of a Christian, and are not things that Christians should be manifesting in their lives. In my opinion, there is not really a clear prediction of there being a third temple, unless we're talking about something that maybe comes with the New Jerusalem. This temple, Ezekiel, of course, sees this amazing temple, and he's told to measure it. The Apostle John saw a new Jerusalem come down to earth. There is going to be something that is part of the reign of Jesus when Jesus comes back to rule over the world. As far as a temple that is on earth before that, it certainly could happen, as David has said. People are wanting to build it. I just don't feel that it is necessary for the return of Christ.
And David, your answer to that? Is it necessary?
Well, it's predicted, Daniel 11:45, I think it says that he places his tabernacle between the two seas. That's understood.
Something about that the Antichrist will do.
Yes, yeah. So his tabernacle meaning a dwelling place, or his base.
And those two seas are?
The two seas are the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, because it says in the Holy Land, right?
Peter, do you think that the events that are taking place in Israel right now between the Palestinians and the Jews, and by the way, it's interesting because all that conflict that's happening right now is in the middle of the Israeli government trying to form a new government, because they in March they had elections. There was no clear-cut victory from any political party in Israel, and it seems like Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to make a coalition with the far right, and possibly by squashing this Hamas rebellion or the missiles that are coming from Gaza hitting Tel Aviv, he's gaining support and maybe using it in a political way to form a new government. So that whole
certainly seems
situation
to be
comes into it.
Something that happens with right-wing Israeli governments, which unfortunately are the majority of Israeli governments have been right-wing for some time now. And of course, you need to remember that in this current event that is going on, this started over Israeli violence. It was not Hamas trying to evict Jews from their homes. It was not Hamas who stormed an Israeli place of worship. Now, I think it's quite unfortunate this way things are, where Hamas uses violence in response to Israeli violence. We've seen already an example of how there is a Palestinian Authority that does not use violence. In fact, they cooperate with Israel.
And the Palestinian Authority basically in the West Bank.
Yes, unfortunately, they do not get much in the way of concessions in return for their cooperation. I just don't see, though, how what Hamas does can be a good solution, although a lot of Palestinians see what they do and then they support the Hamas violence as a legitimate retaliation to what Israel does. Of course, as we see again and again, it results in scores, if not hundreds, of deaths, because when Israel fights with Hamas, Israel has the firepower, Israel has the means to inflict very real damage.
As we're seeing in the statistics
The Palestinians
right now.
can do next to nothing in return
So
to
far,
that.
over 200 Palestinians have been killed. I don't know how many injured, and I think 30 Israelis have been killed since the recent violence of the last few weeks. And as it escalates, you wonder, actually, if the Israelis could take portions of the Bible that they believe, at least the Old Testament, and is there anything in the Old Testament that would cause them to love their neighbors, or did that just come with Jesus? Love your neighbor as yourself. Is there anything in the Bible
if
that
they read the prophets, there is a lot about that. The prophets were amazing men who were connected to the Spirit of God, and there is so much in there about this the rule that the kind of godliness that God wanted to bring through His people, through the Jews, through the Messiah, is something that in that world that is described in the prophets, you would not see God's people behaving in the way that Israel currently behaves. I don't think there is a connect, therefore, between those prophecies and this current state of Israel. I admire the Israelis for some of the good that they've done. I'm glad that the Jews have their state, but we need to keep that separate from what the Bible says. And when they do what's right, that's very good. We should be supportive of them. But when they do what's wrong, we should not be blinded to say, that's wrong. You're not acting according to the way that God has told his people to act.
David, getting back to the temple then, if the temple were to be built in Jerusalem, it would be there would have to be some major changes. Actually, the destruction of one of the main mosques, or somehow the space for a new temple would have to be right there in the same place. How could that ever happen without there being a major war? And then, of course, talk about tempers flaring. That would be all. It almost seems like it would be all-out war in the Middle East to even build a temple there. How could that happen in your view?
Well, I think the Spring of Gihon is very important.
This is a little creek or river that runs
it was
to the back
a
of where
spring that fed all of Jerusalem.
the
one
water
time.
source for Jerusalem.
Yes, it was a water source, and it was a water source for the cleansing of the sacrifice in the temple.
Okay, to bring this to our viewer, I think what you're saying is that the place where they could build the temple would
Yes.
not be where the mosque is. There's another location nearby where that spring is and where maybe
Exactly.
the old temple was actually located.
That's right.
So they could build it pretty close nearby, but it would be a different piece of land.
That's right. Exactly.
And maybe we could put a map up there and show you where the mosque is, the Dome of the Rock that we're talking about, where presumably Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac. That could be a solution. You could have the
Yes.
mosque and you could have the new temple for the Jews right there.
It certainly seems that if they wanted a temple, they could have a temple.
Yes.
I'm not sure, maybe it's not as popular in Israel as we might think it is, but for some reason they have not built a temple.
That's
why,
right.
why do you think that is?
Well, personally, that's quite a question, actually, and I hope the answer is not that they want to destroy the Mosque of Omar or anything like that. That would bring the whole Middle East into the conflict.
And
The thing is, I
if
think
the whole
they
Middle
just-
East was brought into the conflict, then out of that
That-
could emerge a new world government that brings peace to everybody, and everybody is happy, and therefore we get the Antichrist, and all that could be birthed out of a situation like that.
This is all theoretical,
Yeah.
and I really don't know, and I just hope it doesn't happen. I do hope that they do manage to realize that they can build their temple somewhere else, and it's just, over the Spring of Gihon is the ideal place, and where I believe the last temple was.
Okay, so if you're watching this and you are Israeli or Jew or a Christian who wants to see the temple built, David just put his idea forth there, and that's a good location that might not cause a lot of trouble. I did want to bring out one other point, and that is with the conflict that is going on right now. Last year, or recently, when President Trump recognized Israel's capital as Jerusalem, there was no big uproar among the Palestinian people, and that was a major announcement. And I guess the new embassy is being constructed right now. And also with what they call the Abraham Accord, the peace treaty between the UAE and Israel and some of the other smaller Arab countries making peace with Israel. There was also not a very big uproar among the rest of the Arab world or the Palestinians. But the big uproar comes from the cutting of the speakers in the mosque during a holy day, and the eviction of 6 families, which could be looked at as such a small minor incident. These small minor incidents, but those are the things that trigger the people of Palestine.
Well, naturally, what triggers them is going to be acts of violence towards them. Being evicted, it's what's called ethnic cleansing, when they see their people continually being evicted from their homeland. That's called ethnic cleansing. Or when I think what happened here is it got to the point where Israeli security forces stormed the mosque complex with tear gas and rubber bullets. That is lethal force. So whether United Arab Emirates recognizes Israel or not, I don't think they're going to be upset about it. These aren't people who are prone to acts of irrational violence, but there are things when people get hurt, they do react.
Yes.
No, also, I think it's a matter of religion, because the Middle East being mostly of Arab descent and Muslim. If anything happens in the temple or around the temple, it causes an uproar. And that's what they're trying to defend. They're trying to defend their faith. So I think the Jewish people would be wise just to stay away from those locations and go about their business some other way. Right now, they're trying to get the water from the Jordan River to irrigate their lands, and it has to go through the Palestinian lands. So I think they should be on their best behavior, actually, trying to make this work. And I think they should compensate the Palestinian people in good faith for what they're taking, for what they're accessing on their land. If things like that did happen, I think it would be a measure, a step toward a real interesting peace agreement.
I think the Palestinians have shown that they're quite reasonable. You see the level of cooperation that the Palestinian Authority has given to Israel. I think goodwill towards the Palestinians is reciprocated, and I really wish that Israel would show more of that and drop this kind of war footing, this war mentality that they have towards this whole situation.
I think within Israel there is quite an element of sympathy toward the Palestinians among the Jewish people. We hope that this has been an interesting talk for you, and if you have any opinions on anything that has been said here, any opinions on the building of a third temple, or any opinions on the recent Palestinian-Jewish conflict that is going on right now, we invite you to leave your comments below. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please take a moment to do that. We appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.